Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we are here for a session all about the prospect to cash solution for Dynamics 365. I'm really interested to dive into this one, as I'm sure you all are. Got a really strong response from everyone in our readership, and we're ready to go. So our presenter today is Rick Schoenecker from PowerObjects. He'll be taking us through all of today's information. And we do welcome your questions and input today. So if you have a question as we go along here, look for the Q&A block to the right of the main presentation area. And if you don't see it, look up to the upper right for a question mark icon and click that. That should open up your Q&A. Enter questions at any point. We will be getting to as many as we have time for at the end of Rick's presentation. So without any further delay, I do want to hand things off to Rick to get us started.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay.
We can.
Awesome. Okay, so today's webinar is Prospect to Cash, a Dynamics 365 end-to-end solution. What this really is we are going to walk through using Microsoft PowerApps and the Common Data Service to show some simple ways, easy ways that you can integrate information between Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations and Dynamics 365 Sales. So things like accounts and customers and products and sales orders, etc. We're going to be leveraging a prospect to cash solution that Microsoft has provided, giving us some easy templates to make this all happen. So let's get started. So my name is Rick Schoenecker. I'm an ERP consultant with PowerObjects. I've been working with Microsoft Dynamics for the last 15 years or so. I started off actually with Dynamics GP and spent a good deal of time working kind of in that space. Then started stepping into, well, back then the Exapta / Dynamics AX world, kind of starting off with, versions 4 and 2009 and 2012, and then Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. I'd say the last 7 or 8 years or so, my focus has really been in the finance and operations space. So a little bit about PowerObjects. We're 100% focused on Microsoft Dynamics 365, which means that's all we do. We live in that space. We focus specifically on Dynamics 365, so sales and CE, finance and operations, talent, all the associated applications that go with it. A little bit about us. So we were founded in 1993, and then we were acquired by HCL in 2015. We're a leader in the industry, and we provide exceptional offerings of service support, education, and add-ons for Microsoft Dynamics 365. We've been Partner of the Year multiple years running, and our website is one of the most widely visited Dynamics 365 websites and blogs in the world. A little bit of hardware here, I guess. Just kind of listing some of our achievements. Worldwide Partner of the Year for Dynamics 365 in 2017, and you can kind of see the rest of the list here. All right, let's dive into it. Here's our agenda. I'm not a big slide guy, so this is going to be mostly demo, but we will show a couple of slides when we go through this overview of the Common Data Service, the prerequisites, and the templates that are available. Then we'll jump into a demo. I'm going to walk through how you actually set this up and run some of these integrations, and then we'll take time for some questions. Okay, so what is the Common Data Service? It's an Azure-based application platform that enables us to build and extend apps with business data. The Common Data Service does all the work and the heavy lifting for us to bring the data across from the Dynamics 365 offerings so you can focus on building and delivering the apps, automating things, and using things like PowerApps, Power BI, and Microsoft Flow. At the core, the Common Data Service is a Microsoft Azure-based cloud data storage service that allows us to surface the data from multiple applications like Dynamics 365, Office 365, similar Azure, even non-Azure-based services. It takes all that data and it makes it available in one central place. The data model in the Common Data Services is referred to as the Common Data Model. So that basically contains a bunch of out-of-the-box data entities. These entities contain the required set of data fields to store everything. Some examples of the entities are like customers, accounts, contacts, orders, etc. So when you create a new environment in the Common Data Service, you'll see all these available entities that you can take advantage of, or you can actually create your own entities as you need them. You can also modify the standard entities of the Common Data Service to be able to store data specific to your business needs. So the Microsoft Dynamics 365 data integration feature of this enables the flow of the data between sales and finance and operations and some other products through the Common Data Service. So, for example, customer info from sales can flow into finance and operations. You don't have to manually move the data, or you do not need to use any type of third-party data integration tool. So here's kind of an overview or the flow. Setting up the integrations using the Common Data Service is done in Microsoft PowerApps. So PowerApps is where you set up your connections, create projects, configure your mappings, etc. I like to think of PowerApps as the front-end interface for interacting with the data in your quote-unquote database. You can kind of see that in this illustration here. So PowerApps is your connections. Before you can work with an integration project, you have to provision a connection for each system that you want to work with in the PowerApps portal. Then you reference these connections in your data integration project. The connections are stored in the Common Data Service environment, however, they operate above the environments. So then you have projects. The projects themselves enable the flow of the data between the systems. A project is a list of one or more tasks, and those tasks identify mappings between a source and then a Common Data Service entity, and then a mapping between the Common Data Service entity and a destination. So think of the Common Data Service as kind of that middle repository that everything flows through. So the mappings indicate which fields map to which other fields. They can also specify default values and value mappings. The tasks run in a specific order depending on how you set them up in the project task list. Connection sets are a collection of two or more connections, your organization mapping info, so like a entity in finance and operations gets mapped to an org on the sales/CRM side. This also contains integration keys that can be used among projects. You can take a connection set and set it up for development and then switch it over one when you're ready to roll for production. And a key piece of information that's stored in the connection set is that mapping of those organizational units. So if I'm looking at finance and operations, and I'm looking at the demo data, and I have USMF. I have to say USMF gets mapped to this mapping in the Common Data Service database, and then that gets mapped to an org on the sales side. So there are some prerequisites for this. You can see that stuff here on the screen. These are the versions of finance and operations and sales that you need. If you deployed anything now, you're going to be well above any of those requirements for doing that. So this is talking about finance and operations platform update 8. We're well beyond that now. They're on the 7.3 release. Prior to that was the platform update 12. So should be no issues there. Again, the same with the sales, enterprise edition. Anything that would get deployed now would meet those requirements. And then there is a prospect to cash solution for Dynamics 365 for sales that you need to upload into the CRM side. So this enables some extra fields and things in sales. Like on the sales side, there is not really an account number per se. So this adds that account number field, and then any account that you would create in sales would get assigned an account number, and then that account number would flow over to finance and operations as that's a required field. So again, for the purposes of the demo, we're going to be working with this prospect to cash solution provided by Microsoft. This provides a direct sync across finance and operations and sales, and it comes with a bunch of templates that enable the flow of data for accounts, contacts, products, quotes, orders, invoices, etc. A couple of other prerequisites: you just need to have some specific permissions in each one of these applications in order for the data to flow between the two. So you could certainly use, an account that has, the highest level of permissions, or you can set up accounts that have specific permissions to read and write to whatever data entities you're working with. You also need to enable finance and operations for batch processing. Here's a list of the templates that are available right now with the prospect to cash solution. It makes it super easy to get rolling on this process. All right, let's do the demo here. Give me a sec while I bring up my browser window here. Okay, so here we are in PowerApps. You can register to use this as a free account. So you'll want to log into the PowerApps site. And when you do so, it's going to ask you to create an environment. This process can take a bit. While the environment is processing, it basically creates that Common Data Service database that sits up in Azure, and it gets filled with some sample data. Microsoft recommends you don't use the default environment, so when you do log in and you get that prompt to create one, you should certainly do that. Once you get your environment set up, you can set up security for the environment. And I'll show that quick here in the admin center. If I go into here, basically this just allows you to restrict what people can and can't do with the data. If you have certain people in certain roles that can see certain stuff, you can set up security to allow them to do that or restrict things. So here's some examples. In this environment where we were working on integrating with talent, we set up these security roles in here, and then I can go through and add users to those security roles. Okay, back to the main PowerApps site. So first, let's talk about entities. So the Common Data Service allows us to securely store and manage the data within a set of standard and custom entities. An entity is a set of fields that it's used to store data similarly to a table within a database. After your data is stored, you can use PowerApps to build applications or integrations using that data. Out of the box, the Common Data Service or Common Data Model provides a set of entities that support some key scenarios. So for example, like worker, employment, and organization entities support employment scenarios, purchase order and purchase order line, support purchasing scenarios, etc. It's pretty self-explanatory. So let's dig into these entities here. So right now what we're looking at is the entities that are sitting in that Common Data Service database. You can see account and contact and leads. Just think of this as a database really, because essentially that's what that is. I can drill into one of these entities. And just like if I was looking in, I guess, SQL, I can see the fields in that entity, the data types, the type, if it's required, if it's searchable, etc. I can see the keys, relationships, field groups, and then I can actually see the data that sits in these entities. This takes usually a second to load up. So I can go in here and see the data that's sitting out here. If I want to, I can create a custom entity. I can add fields. It really just depends on whatever your needs are for your specific business. For these scenarios here, we don't really need to edit or modify or maintain any of the entities that are out of the box. If you have custom entities in sales, you don't have to do anything. But if you've built a custom data entity in finance and operations, you need to turn on change tracking in finance and operations. And I'll show that in a minute when we hop over into that environment. So before we can get started building the integration, we have to start off with connections. Okay, so I basically need to say, you know, what am I working with here? And I need to make the connections to whatever those business applications are. So you can see here some connections I already have set up. Let's walk through how we can set up a new connection. So if I click on new connection, you can actually see it's pretty cool. The connectors that Microsoft has already built for us. There's quite an abundance of them to choose from that you could use to connect your various systems. So I'm going to scroll down here and I am going to find Dynamics 365. So this is my sales one. And I can choose to create a connection. It's going to make me authorize here. And now it added that connection. I can do the same with finance and operations to make that initial connection. When we get a little bit further down the line, we're going to be able to pick the environments for which we are connecting to. But this is just establishing that initial connection. Okay, once we have our initial connections set up, we can actually go in and start creating the integrations. So to do that, we need to navigate to the PowerApps Admin Center. Go up to this gear here and click on that, and I can drill into the Admin Center. And I'm going to pick the environment that I'm going to work in. Before we get started on building this, I am going to show something that's a little bit newer, is a data policy. I can create a policy that basically restricts what things can talk to what. So, obviously an organization's data is critical to its success, and that data needs to be available, but it also needs to be protected, and you got to make sure that you don't share that with an audience that shouldn't have access to it. So to protect this, PowerApps added these DLP policies that you can enforce to define which things can be exposed and which things can't. So, for example, an org that uses PowerApps might not want its business data from sales to be automatically published to like its Twitter feed or whatever. So you can set up a policy to kind of block that stuff. So if I hit continue here, I have an option to specify which apps can talk and which apps cannot. And again, the list is pretty huge. Okay, let's get back to the data integrations. Now this screen, when I first started working with this, was a little bit confusing. Mostly because I didn't read the documentation ahead of time. I'm kind of the guy that likes to try to just figure things out, and then when I get stuck, I go back and look at it. So initially, I went through and went, okay, projects, connection sets, templates. I'm going to create a new project and then kind of work my way from left to right. But what I found is you cannot create a project unless you have a connection set first. So let's go through setting up a connection set. So I click on connection sets, and I'm going to click new connection set. I'm going to give it a name. And then I can choose my connections. Now in this drop-down is the list of those connections that we set up a couple of minutes ago. So I can pick, depending on which way the integration is going to go, these are just a bunch of duplicates, but typically you would see, your singular set of connections. So I'm going to say that this is going from sales, and then it knows which sales or CRM orgs I have access to because I established that initial connection. So I'm going to pick my environment here, and then this is going to go from sales to the common data service, and then I'm going to add a third connection to get me to finance and operations. And then I need to choose my finance and operations environment here. So I'm going to pick the one that I'm going to work with. And then this is that organization mapping that I was talking about earlier. So in sales, I need to specify what org I'm working with. And it's really just the environment name. So and then my org in the common data service, by default, this is just org 001 unless you're setting up multiple entities. And then I'm basically picking my company in finance and operations. And then I hit create. If I spelled this wrong, which I did, it's going to throw an error. And I just wanted to show that. So it knows that I picked the wrong environment name here. It says it's not valid, so I would need to fix that in order to make this work. I'm just going to cancel out of this here because I've already got some connection sets set up for this webinar. So once I have those connection sets, I can go in and create a project. So I click on projects and then new project here. I can now see the templates that are available to me that I listed on an earlier slide that come built with that prospect to cash scenario. So I'm just going to pick I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to pick one of the templates, and this is syncing sales accounts to customers in finance and operations. So I'm going to hit next. I picked the connection set, and this is where I got stuck before, is I didn't have a connection set, and it wouldn't let me get any further. So I'm going to pick this one here that I created earlier. I'm going to hit next, and it's going to let me then verify my organizations that I set up in that connection set. If I had multiple orgs set up, I could pick between whatever I had set up in that connection set. And then I hit next, and then I hit create. Okay, so now I've got my project, and it's going to give me some tasks. With these templates, the tasks are already in here, okay? So the tasks are really the integrations and the mappings. For the most part, these mappings should be complete and good to go. But if it's not, it's going to throw a message here at the top saying that there are issues with the mappings. So if there are, I'm going to drill into them and take a look. So this is basically telling me my source, which is sales, and my destination, which is finance and operations. And here's my fields in the source, and here's my fields in the destination, okay? There's different map types, so I can have equals, I can have a function, and I can set like a default value. I can do some transformations if I need to. Some very, very basic things, but similar to what you would see with other integration tools. If I have custom fields that I need to map that are not in these templates, I can do add a map, and I could pick like whatever field I want and choose to map that from sales to finance and operations. Once I do this, if everything checks out and I hit save, it's going to validate if this is if these mappings are good. If they are, it's gonna. That's it. There's my project. There's my integration. I could go ahead at this point and actually run this project. So I'm going to jump back to my data integrations and let me move this down just a little bit. And I'm going to hop over to sales. So I created a couple of accounts in here in the sales side. And then I'm also going to look at my products here. And for the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to select a couple of these products that are already in here. And I'm just going to delete them. So I have this PowerObjects webinar one. I also created one called MSDynamicsWorld. These have not been integrated yet. So if I go back to my list of my projects, I can go in here and drill into this and say run project. This will take a little bit to run. And then I'm also going to kick off my products one. And we'll let those things bake in the background here. And we'll take a look at what I can see in my integrations. So getting back to my integration, so I had my tasks, right? I had my connections. I also have the ability to do some scheduling. So these can be run manually, or you can put them on a schedule. They're not real time per se. You could use, you could build flow with PowerApps to get it to be a real-time integration, but these right now are set to run on a schedule. So I could set this to run every 1 hour, every 1 minute, run manually, whatever. I can set a start time. I can set an end time. And if I do put it on a schedule, this is something new that they added recently, was actually notification emails. If I'm running an integration manually, obviously I'm keeping an eye on it, right? But if I'm running it on a schedule, it's nice to have those notifications letting us know if there's any warnings or failures. So I can also drill into the execution history, and I can see that this one is running here. If I go back and I look at a previous run of this, I can see that I have some warnings. So let's drill in and see what these warnings are all about. So it gives us some information to go on. It's not super in-depth, but typically it's enough for me to get started. So basically, I'm looking at the list of the records, and it's telling me that a unit ID is missing. So basically, I'm integrating products, and there's a unit of measure assigned to the product in finance and operations, and that unit ID is not set up in sales. So these products did not integrate. So I need to go back, take a look at what of these unit of measures are, and I need to fix the unit ID in sales before I can get those products to integrate. So let's go back here and let's look at our execution history. And see if this stuff shows up. Okay, so it did integrate some of my accounts, and I did get some warnings. Now this is interesting. It didn't give me much to go on, but there are some other places that we can look, and I'll show you that in a minute. So if I go into finance and operations, and I go into all customers, I should be able to, hopefully, see that these two accounts on the sales side moved over into finance and operations and created a customer. So you can see with these built-in templates that Microsoft has given us how quick you can kind of get a handle on doing some basic integrations between these two applications. And it really gives you a good jump-off point. so that you can understand how this process works, and if you want to build your own, that you can do that. So let's go back and look at these products. I deleted all the ones that had, A's in them, I guess. And let's see if we've got these products showing back up here now. You can see the ones that I nuked out of here before are now back in the system. Again, it's just that simple to get started with these integrations using the prospect to cash templates. Now, I mentioned also that there's some other places we can look to see how those integrations have run. So if I go back to finance and operations, and I go into data management, you can actually see those data projects in finance and operations. So these are those integrations that I've run before. They're showing up here as a data project, and I can see recent runs. Okay, so this one, if I drill into it here, it tells me that 2 were created, 3 were updated, 0 errors. Okay, and I can kind of get a nice graphic of that stuff here. I can drill in and look at the staging data, and it will show me what was moved over. Okay, and I can also see ones that are showing me some issues. So if I look at, let's see. Let's look at this one here. I can show that this one did have some issues, and I can drill in and kind of see the staging data there and see some things that had issues with the integrations. So there's really 2 places you can look. One is in PowerApps itself, but the really good one is looking right here in finance and operations. One last thing we'll take a peek at here in the admin center is obviously they have some built-in Power BI in here too. So I can take a quick look at all my integrations. Obviously I can see the latest syncs here, and I can drill in and look at the execution history and the schedule and the details. But I can also see my runs, things that have happened over the last whatever time I want to set this to. So I can do 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Obviously, the bigger the window, the harder it is to see, but you can certainly do that. So in summary, using this prospect to cash scenario that Microsoft provides is a very easy way for you to get started on building some simple but pretty powerful integrations between Dynamics 365 for sales and Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. There are some links in the slide deck that will take you to the Microsoft documentation and show you how to get started, how to download the solution and upload it into sales. It gives you a breakdown of each one of the templates. If there's any concerns or things that you need to have set up on either side for either one of those templates, it's going to explain that for you. But once you review that stuff, and hopefully including the information that I shared with you on this webinar, it'll be real easy for you to get started. So that being said, that kind of concludes the session for today. Looks like we're a little bit early, but that'll give us time for questions. If you have them, I'll do my best to answer them. And then if not, give you back a few minutes to your busy days. So, questions?
All right, thanks, Rick. And a few questions have already come in, and if you still have any questions out there in the audience, do feel free to enter them into the Q&A block now. So some of the first questions that came in as you were sort of starting up your demo involved just some practical things like how to get access to the solution for Dynamics 365. Do you have to import the solution? Rick, are you hearing me?
Sorry about that. I was taking a sip of water. Yes, so let's do this. You have to go out to the Microsoft site and download the prospect to cash scenario. So I'll bring that up on the screen here. So if you go out to the prospect to cash scenario and you look at these system requirements, in the list is this prospect to cash solution for sales. So it's basically a zip file that you download. And once you extract it, you go in here and it has this package deployer. You click on the package deployer and you hit continue. And it's going to basically ask you to log in. And you have to do your sign in here, but then basically it's going to show you your list of sales environments, and you pick the one that you want to upload the solution to, and it uploads it, and that's all you need to do at that point. It's that seamless. And what that does is that adds things like we talked about on the account side. So out of the box sales, there's no account number. There are some people that do use an account number, but out of the box there isn't an account number. This creates this field, it locks it down, and when I hit save, it adds an account number to the account, and then this is what transfers over into finance and operations because that is required. That is a required field in finance and operations. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, another question. Is it necessary to use common data service, or can we somehow go direct between the systems?
Well, some of the integrations are direct. It just uses, with the new solutions, but it uses the common data service as kind of that mapping point. So you can see in the prospect to cash scenario, some of these talk about direct between the two. But what the common data service does is it basically, it's creating that translation between the systems for you and saying this equals this here, which equals this there. But the common data service is really built as to be that middle piece. So it's not like, let's say if I was using Scribe or something like that, where I'm just creating the mappings straight between the two. It uses this as a middle go-between.
And there's a question about entering the name of a CRM instance. Can you use instance instead of a business unit?
It is the instance. So if I look at, and maybe it isn't completely clear here, but when we create the connection sets, this is actually my instance name of CRM. This isn't the name of the organization within CRM. This is this instance name. So PO Finance and Operations. So hopefully that answers the question.
All right, someone would like to know, is flow required to, I guess, run the transactions or the actions on a trigger, such as an order that's entered or an opportunity that's won?
Yep, you can use flow. You can also, there is an SDK for PowerApps that allows you to get a little bit more, obviously, granular with this stuff. So I do have a flow set up in here. Where's my flows? So I have a flow set up in here that I turned off, that on create, it copies it through, and then it also sends an email out notifying that something was added. So you can add flow into this if you want to. The scenario in the prospect to cash doesn't dive into that, but there's other documentation out there that kind of shows how you can add that flow in there. But for the sake of this, I turned it off because I wanted to run it and show you the scheduling and whatnot. But it is, if you want to do real time, you got to use some other options.
All right, I want to make a call for questions here. I do see at least one more right now, and that is someone just kind of puts in, actually adds their experience that they worked on CRM sales order to operations order, but when creating the tasks and adding the entity, they faced an issue that when they're updating an order line, it won't update the order line in AX, but create another order line. Have you seen this issue? And they really just want to update the quantity.
I have not seen that. But I guess I don't know that I've tested that per se. So let me just clarify. Basically, you're saying that the order already exists, and I just want to update the quantity on a specific line rather than add another line. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen that. If there is contact info for the person in the question, I can try it out and let you know my experience. I would definitely say if you've tested this before, they had a bunch of other templates that used to be out here. But there's a bunch of new templates. So if you were looking at this like 2 months ago and that was kind of the behavior you were seeing, you might want to try some of these new templates and see if you get some different results. But again, if you have a way of referencing the person and they want to share an email address, I can certainly look at that and respond direct.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can probably put you in touch. All right, I'm just looking here for any additional questions. Okay, so here's another one. What if there's one instance of CRM, but there are multiple companies?
There is a way that you can set up integration keys, and that is also in this article here. Basically, you have to take an Excel spreadsheet, and you have to you take the Excel spreadsheets and you set up what those translations are for that, and you can upload that into there. It is in here. I'd have to find it exactly, but there is a way to handle that, and it's pretty easy. I just don't happen to have it handy.
All right, and another question here. If I need to sync order and line information, do we need to do it together in a single project or in two different projects?
You can do it in either or, I guess. So you have the ability to add tasks to your project, or you could set it up. You could do it either way, I guess.
All right. I think we are through all the questions. Again, they're coming in a couple different places, so just making sure I don't miss anything.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that, let's see, maybe there's one more here. Okay, I'm just asking for the recording. We have recorded today's event. We will be reaching out with further details to everyone who registered on how to get access to that in the next couple of days here.
And
okay,
for anybody else,
yeah.
Sorry, my email address is up on the screen, so if you do have some questions or if the person who wanted to know about updating the line, if they just want to jot down my email address, you can fire some questions off direct, and I'll be more than happy to help out.
Great. That's probably a good place to end things. I want to thank everyone in the audience for so many great questions. And Rick, of course, thank you for taking the time to walk us through some of this cool new tech today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was good. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody, too. Don't forget to get your presents.
That's right. Still time. So with that, we are going to wrap things up. Thanks again to everyone in the audience and obviously to Rick as well for making this a great event. We have recorded it and we'll be following up with details soon. Have a great day, everybody.